I couldn't help but think as I was singing that song, and one of the lines says, "We will wait on you, Lord." Well, there's two meanings to that. One is they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. In other words, that's being patient in a way. But the other one is to be as a waiter. But one of the things, people have said to me, well, okay, maybe Jesus was this way here on earth, but he just came down to kind of pay his dues, and then he went back to heaven to be big stuff again, I said, well, you know what? It says Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so there are two things that is said about heaven. One of them is he ever lives to intercede for us. Now, I can understand that because, boy, do we need intercession. But the other one, as it speaks of the marriage supper of the Lamb, artists have tried to portray this, and in people's minds we add to it. And where do you see Jesus seated at that table? Head of the table, right? No. He said he would dress himself as a waiter and wait on us. Ever the servant. Wow. Well, now let's see if we can take up some speed here. I think we're supposed to be done by 5. But I am going to add 2. I dropped them out. I didn't know we'd have time for it, and I think we will. But I told you, well, let me see. Down here, we've already got that he was servant. We've already done that. And human. And I left you hanging with obedient. So now, he's God. Who does he have to be obedient to, But interesting thing, as he walked this path with us, he walked it as a human being. John tells us something in John chapter 3. Now, usually we think immediately of John 3:16, and that's fine. But there's more to that chapter there. And one of the things that happens is John himself says about Jesus that the Spirit was given to him without measure. In other words, an unlimited amount of the Holy Spirit. So I think Jesus walked this earth as a fully Spirit-filled human being. Now that's an exciting thing to me because I think he presents this possibility to us in a dependence that we have upon the Holy Spirit. A lot of people are afraid of the Holy Spirit because they think about maybe wild Pentecostal services they've been in or something. And I'd be afraid of that too at times. But then at the same time, I have to say, but they do this out of faith. So I don't want to, even the snake handlers, they do it out of faith. And the fact of the matter is, and I happen to happen upon this once in my own personal studies, there was a sociological study made of the snake handlers. And they said they were the most outstanding members of the community. They were the honest people, they were the leaders, they were the people that everyone depended upon. And I thought, well, I'm going to quit criticizing that. I just don't intend to handle any of those snakes. Yes. But if they do it out of faith, see? And so I'm not going to fault them. I'm learning to be that way a whole lot more than I used to be. Something happened here in Hawaii. You know who Danny Lehman is? Years ago, I was doing just a kind of a small seminar. We had it in the living room of a house, and most of us just laid down on the floor so that sleeping would be much more convenient that way while I was teaching. And I talked about something that happened in Southern California. My daughter, Gloria, my oldest daughter, had gone with some friends to the Rose Parade. And when she came back, I said, "How was it?" "Oh, it was great, Daddy. But, Daddy, at the end, there was this guy with a big horn thing, amplifier walking along yelling, 'If you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell. If you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell.'" And says, I was so embarrassed. I said, "Yeah, I understand." That same day, I got on a plane and flew to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I saw a guy get on the plane with a bullhorn, and I wondered, But when we got to Tulsa, he got off, and he just greeted me. He didn't know me. He said, "Hey, brother, God bless you." Yeah, God bless you. And my friend who picked me up as a pastor there, and he said, "Do you know who that guy was?" I said, "I'm suspicioning." He said, "He goes to the Rose Parade every year, and he follows it at the end, yelling in his bullhorn, 'If you don't go to know Jesus, you're going to hell.'" And then he said something. He told me, he said, he doesn't really like to do that. But he said he was on a street corner once and had never given God a second of thought until somebody with a bullhorn said, "If you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell." And that shook me and caused me to become a Christian. And he says, he said he does that because there's got to be some other guys like him out there. And he's trying to harvest them, because nobody else will do that. And then Danny Lehman interrupted me as I was telling that, and he said, "Yes, here." He said, when I'd take people down in, what is it called, Hotel Row, something like that? What? Hotel Street, okay. There are bars and I don't know what all else there. Hotels, maybe? I don't know. And as, he was taking people down there to witness, and they came upon a guy who was outside of a bar yelling at people like that, and someone said to him, "Why does he do that, Danny? Isn't there a better way?" And Danny said, "Well, come with me, we'll ask him." So they stopped him, and he said, "Tell this guy why you do this." And he said, "I'll be glad to." He said, "I used to come to this bar all the time, and I would stagger out of here drunk. And there was somebody out here yelling once, 'If you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell.' And he said, that's what turned my life around. And there are other guys just like me in there. I'm going to get them." So it pays not to do a lot of criticizing. Even if you see somebody on television or what have you, and you think, "No, that's not good the way they do that. I don't know." Well, stop and find out and think, are they trying to do this out of their faith in the Lord? They're just doing it weird. Paul said something that has affected me, and unfortunately I don't find that it affects a whole lot of guys. He said, "Some people preach Christ just to cause me trouble. Some people preach Christ just to get money," and so forth. But thank God Christ is being preached, I thought, what a healthy attitude. God can take care of the rest. In fact, up in heaven, they're probably looking at me and wondering, how in the world does he get away with that? What are we going to do? Aye. So, obedient. Here he is. He's God. Who do you need to be? Here's what Jesus says. "I only do what I see the Father do. I only say what I hear the Father say. My food is to do the will of Him that sent me." So even as walking as a man, walking as a fully Spirit-filled man, he only wanted to do what he saw the Father do and say what he heard the Father say. He was obedient. He says, "I delight to do His will." Now, the will of God's gotten bad rap, I've heard people say, "Well, I'm not willing, but I'm willing to be made willing." Or they worry that God's going to say, if I do His will, He's going to send me to Africa. And I'll have to eat monkey brains. I don't like monkey brains. Or He's going to send me where there isn't a McDonald's. And I can't take my pillow, But folks, take note that when Jesus said for us to pray, "Thy will be done here in earth as it is in heaven." That's what makes heaven heaven. So anything that we say negative about it, obviously, is just not true, because it's heaven on earth when His will is done here. So don't be afraid as you pray to pray, Lord, please, your will be done right here with me, with those that I love and care for and pray for. Let your will be done with them. Give them heaven, God. Give them heaven. Occasionally, when I'm heading out on a trip, like I did when I headed for Zimbabwe in April, some of my friends would write to me and say, give them heaven, Gail. And I'm glad to do that. And I find that even in a country like that I've really had a lot of influence in, still for about almost 27 years, I hadn't had any, well, I had through the leader, but they didn't always copy him, and they would preach in ways that I'd think, oh God, why do they scream? I don't understand a word the moment they start screaming. And they didn't get that after the leader. When he speaks, you hear every word, and it's powerful. And then I get up, and I don't scream at anybody, but I just give them the love of God in ways they hadn't heard before. And I have their absolute attention, And I don't know, kind of a rock star there. I'm not complaining. So Jesus was obedient. Now, I'm going to stop here before I put number 12 out, and I think I have time to deal with this because I left it out earlier. He said you have to humble yourself as a child. So 4A is as a child. Now, one thing that I notice about children is they tend to be humble, I mean, they are who they are. They don't know how to fool you yet. They learn plenty fast, But a child, my children, we enjoyed watching them grow. We'd like to actually have fed them something that would keep them that size. But they didn't know how to deceive. My son came in one day. He had seen a magician somewhere at one of the parks, and he said, Dad, I want to pull a trick on you. Okay? I said, all right, son. I've got a rock in my hand. I want you to tell me which hand it's in. Okay? All right, son. Are you ready, Daddy? I'm ready. What do you do, My grandson Timothy at age 5, that's a rich age, by the way. Pay close attention to it. You'll get stories. Did the same thing. Grandpa, I want to pull a trick on you. I've got a rock in my hand. And he was a little bit better at it in that one hand was a little more open than the other one. And I started to choose that one just to give him a chance, but I thought, no, I got to be honest. Timothy, I think it's in that hand. He said, just a minute. And I think being as a child, God is calling us to be that unable to deceive, that kind of honesty that you can relax in because you're not fooling anybody and you're not trying to. It's part of humility, see, as a child. And also, I guess we can call this 4B, to be as the younger. Now, being as the younger or the older in our country is really no significant thing. It's certainly not a legal thing. But it was a legal thing back then. The elder brother had the name, the position, the authority. He was what some would call the blessed child, And I think with this, when Jesus said to be as the younger, He's saying, look, you're not going to be the top dudes in this world. The world as a whole is not going to be all that happy that you're a follower of Jesus. Get used to it. It's okay. Now, there's a guy on TV, I think it's a 699 Club or something similar, close to that. His belief is we are supposed to take over the world, become the presidents and the owners of the banks and so forth, so that we can establish the kingdom of God so that Jesus can come back. And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. I don't know how he missed that. I guess that's better for TV, what he's trying to do. He got caught in a scandal or two trying to establish the kingdom of God. That doesn't work. At any rate, folks, and this is a problem with our being sometimes so political. The kingdom is not going to come through the Republicans. Sorry about that. I'm having trouble finding a Republican that I would want to trust the kingdom with. And it's not going to come through the Democrats either. You probably don't know any. But they are around in places, and the kingdom's not coming through them either. It will not be established by political methods. But person by person will be won into the kingdom. It'll only come by spiritual means. And to be as the younger means that, look, we're not going to be the big dudes in this world. It's okay. You know, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people I have preached to, but I have never preached to a governor or to a president or anybody like that. I don't know that if I've ever preached to a big CEO. I have preached to a member of Congress, a representative. I didn't know he was in the congregation. It was Raul Reese's congregation. And when I said something about politicians, they didn't laugh. I thought, and they came up and introduced me afterward to this man, and I said, well, I apologize for what I said about him. All right. But the next time he was there, I knew he was there. I went after him. I said, as I was explaining what an oxymoron is, you know, mutually exclusive terms like government organization or honest politician. He came up to me after service. He was pretty upset. He said, what do I have to do to keep you from impugning my integrity? I said, it's easy. Have integrity that cannot be impugned. The next morning, front pages of the LA Times, they caught him in a scandal. Voila. Well, all of that to say, don't get upset if we're not president or if we're not mayor or anything like that. We're a lot more effective when we are not that, actually. Jesus made himself of no reputation, so to speak. That way we can get away with more stuff in terms of witnessing. You know, in countries where it's illegal, if you don't mind being anonymous, you can witness. Yeah. Another thing about being as the elder is financial. The elder brother got the majority of the inheritance. So I think what Jesus is saying with this is travel light. Don't get attached to the things of this world. Don't be the rich young ruler, whose God, as it turned out to be, was his things. So we may not have a whole lot, but God takes care of us. I know, because I grew up in abject poverty. I mean, I later on I went back and visited some of the places where we lived. I could not believe we as human beings lived in those shacks. But we were extremely poor. And yet, God took care of us, you know. Even, and I wrote this up in one of my books, when we lived in Greenwood, Mississippi, we would pray in just about every meal. And in one winter, we didn't know what we were going to do. And a hillbilly up on Choctaw Ridge. Now, if any of you ever heard Ode to Billy Joe, where Billy Joe McAllister jumped off the Tallahatchie Bridge. I was baptized in the Tallahatchie River. If he jumped off the bridge, he might have sprained an ankle, but he got stuck in mud. I can tell you that. But a hillbilly up on Choctaw Ridge named Mode Corder heard about us. And he said, look, I got beans in these hills up here. If you want to come and pick them, you can eat. And so all winter long, we ate Crowder peas. I don't know if you know what a Crowder pea is. It's first cousin to a black-eyed pea. But I still like Crowder peas. If I have a chance to eat them, I will. You just don't ever see them anymore. Maybe we ate all of them. Maybe. So God takes care of His kids. I found out that that is true. And He really takes care of His other-centered kids. And the reason Mode heard about us is because in the middle of our poverty, we were still serving the community. When we first moved there, we were met with a petition from the neighborhood for 3 blocks around telling us they did not want us here. They didn't want us starting any churches. And if we did, they would take legal action against us. But then as a family, we just blessed the whole community. And then I got involved in school in ways that my picture and name was in the newspaper every week and so forth. And one by one, starting first with the people who live next door, they came and with tears asked to personally erase their name from that list. And finally, all of the names were gone but one. And he was the guy who had headed the whole thing, and he was a policeman that lived right behind us, and he was very hostile. He wouldn't put his garbage out. He would throw it over our fence for us to have to pick up and put out. My dad was crippled. He had been injured in an airplane accident that left his left side paralyzed and his brain damaged. And he would take walks, but this guy behind us would turn his big Doberman pinchers loose, and they would chew up my dad's hanging left hand, and he couldn't run away from them, that kind. And then something happened that I couldn't help but get a little bit of unholy glee out of. One of the things that I did was, they have a thing, I don't know if they still do this, called Boys State. It's sponsored by the American Legion, and they take juniors between your junior and senior year, and usually just 2 from a town. And I was one of the 2 that was chosen to go down to the capital of Mississippi, Jackson. And one of the guys in our school, who was one of the upper elite guys, I think the first time he ever talked to me was when he said to me, "You got to run for governor." I said, "Why?" "Well, you're the last chance this town has to have a governor." "Okay. Well, I won." And it was a big thing in the town. And when I came back to town, we were met at the city limits by a police escort. Led by this guy who lived behind us, And he was just kind of really embarrassed. And he says, "Well, I guess I was wrong about you." "No, you were probably right." I guess that's enough for that. I think you understand what it means to be as the younger. Sometimes you're much noticed that way. Oh, I could tell too many stories. I got to keep going. Obedient even unto death. The death on the cross. I mentioned, I think, this morning that everything that's alive wants to stay alive. I don't know what it is about life that it wants to continue, even if there's no brain. I don't think you have roaches here in Hawaii. Well, I'll never forget once when we were gone from our house for about a month, and I forgot to call the ex-governator or exterminator, whatever that we had at the time. And you come back in the night, and you turn on the lights, and there they are, all over the place. And they don't just look up at me and say, "You got us. Kill us." No, skitter, 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 because they know I'm going to break into song and dance. La cucaracha, la cucaracha. And I look at them and I think, where do you put a brain? You ain't got a place for a brain in that thing. Why is it that your wanting to be alive is so strong in you? Is there something about life? And I think there is. You see, that's God's creation. If medical science, if scientists could create life, they would be delighted to do it. They'd make billions off of it. And they try. And they may make something that if they put 110 volts to it, it'll that ain't life. Life keeps eluding them. They can make a robot that might even fool you. They're working on that, you know. And if it can really do my work, I'll buy one. But it'd have to be ugly. I'm sorry, I just throw things in. They occur to me, you know. But they just cannot copy. I mean, they can't create it. One of my favorite stories is scientists said to God, it's a joke, folks, so don't worry about it. Said, we don't need you anymore. We can create human beings just like you did. God says, okay, should we have a contest? They said, yeah. And those scientists reached down to grab a handful of dirt, and God says, wait a minute, go get your own dirt. So when Jesus was in that garden, he was now being tempted by his greatest temptation. And that was the temptation to stay alive. He was just like us. He wanted to live. And he says, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Remember, the cup always means death. And we don't know how long this prayer lasted. We get just a little bit of it. And if there was a pause there while he was really thinking this over, maybe thinking, we could do this, Father, or maybe we could do that, you know, and still get the job done, and I could stay alive. And then he won, nevertheless. Not as I will, but as thou wilt. And there, in his greatest temptation, the temptation to stay alive, he won. Obedient even unto death, the death on the cross. It had to be. It had to be. I was deeply moved the other day. I'm more moved by his speaking than I am by his writing. But I was watching on television just a few minutes of Ravi Zacharias. And he was talking about a time that he had opportunity to speak to some leaders of both the Jewish nation and the Palestinians, and the leading Hamas guy was there. And you know, the Muslims, you know, come out of Ishmael, and the Jews out of who? Isaac, something like that. And of course, then Abraham has to take his son up. God says, I want you to go sacrifice your son. The Muslims believe that was Ishmael and not Isaac. And Ravi Zacharias said, there's something we got to pay close attention to. It doesn't matter whose son went up there with him, because either one of them came back with him. And when the son asked, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says, God will provide sacrifice. And at some point, and he spoke to that Hamas guy, you and I are going to have to decide who actually died, whose son actually died. And we'll be responsible for that. That Hamas guy says, you and I are going to meet again. We got to continue this conversation. Boy. It was the only way you and I could be saved. It was the only possible sacrifice that would take care of the mountain of sins that every one of us suffer with and from. Even unto death, the death on the cross. Well, you know, during this time as he's agonizing, don't you know there was an apostolic prayer meeting going on, unlike any prayer meeting you have ever seen, how intensely you could hear them. I love these guys. We're with you, Jesus. They said it. You can count on us. And he comes back and wakes them up. And finally, and they, you know, just an hour, guys. That's all I ask. And so they go back to sleep. He goes back to pray. And then, you know, I think when he woke him up the second time, Peter thought, oh man, have we ever blown it? Oh, I got to make it up to him. And so here come the troops to capture this dangerous man who'd been healing people. And Peter has a sword. The only one that did. Now, the interesting thing about this story, as you know, was told in all four Gospels. And 3 of the Gospels don't tell you who had the sword. One of them had a sword. One of the disciples had a sword. One of them had a sword. John, who didn't get along with Peter very well, lets us know it was Peter. And Peter, sure enough, did the best he could, and using the sword or any human method like this, this is all you need to understand about what you will get. The best you'll do is an ear. And so he hits this guy, Malchus, and John even is kind enough to tell us which ear. Now, if I'm coming at you with a sword, which ear am I going to get? Right. But if I get your right ear, which direction are you going? Away. He hit him from behind. And John tells us, you know, you can't run from me, boy. And so what does Jesus do? Okay, Peter, I'm going to cut off 2 of your ears just so you'll learn a lesson. No. He says, put up your sword. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. And he also says, we have to do this. I have to do this. And he picks up that ear, shakes the dust off. Well, he had to. And puts it back on his head. And I really think that when we get to heaven, Malchus is going to be there. He couldn't have gone through that without recognizing this has to be the Messiah. And you know what? Jesus destroyed the evidence against Peter. Malchus couldn't even take him to court for assault and battery. Your Honor, he cut off my ear. Which one? I keep forgetting. Oh, in my pastorate in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, boy, what a time that was. Martin Luther King was killed while I was there. And in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, that was a major, what do we do now? But I've forgotten what I was going to tell you. If it comes back, I'll tell it around 5 o'clock. But folks, this is not the end of the story, and this is an important thing for us. The resurrection is the most phenomenal thing. Only God can do that. Human beings can be resuscitated, but not from death. Resuscitated from drowning or from some deep injury, But then there is a time that you aren't really dead, and they can resuscitate you from that in many cases, not all. But they can never raise you from the dead. And a rabbi I heard of was asked, what one thing, if it was proved to you about Jesus, would cause you to follow him? He said, if I knew without doubt that the resurrection had taken place, I would be on my knees right now. Well, it has. And we know that. And so there's another one down here. It'll be number 13 on this list. And that is raised. And this we know, that we will be raised up with him on the last day. That's so exciting to me. Every once in a while, you know, the thought of being in heaven, and I'm getting closer to it and thinking about it more now than I used to, is pretty exciting. I've had people who had visions of heaven. I was with a young lady that we led to the Lord, age 26, came down with inoperable and uncurable cancer. And she was keeping it a secret, but, you know, somebody in the medical industry broke all the rules and called us, said, there's a girl in your church who is dying with cancer and she's not telling anybody. And she told us who it was. Well, I immediately then established more of a relationship with her, and she worked at a university, and I'd go take my lunch and we'd have lunch together in her office. And finally I said, look, let's quit just messing around. Don't ask me how I know, but I know that you have inoperable cancer. And I said, I know how I'm going to pray about it. I cannot say for sure what God's going to do, but I know where he is. And here's one thing, you're part of our body. You are not going to go through this alone. I'll walk with you every inch of the way. And I was with her the moment she died. And just a few seconds before she died, she had this vision of heaven. Wow, man. And she was naming people who were there. Wow, that's great. And she really had only 6 months of church in her life. So and I asked her, and she said, oh, and there's Jesus. I said, really? What does he look like? And here was her answer. She stared for a second. She said, well, he's just a good old Joe. I said, that's him. That's him, you know. And she said something else, but that's private between me and her. And then I had a dear friend. He was a retired United Pentecostal preacher. Now, those are the real harsh ones. They're oneness, they call them Jesus-only people, extremely legalistic. He had preached against coffee all of his life because they believed, at least his part of it, that if you drank coffee, you went to hell. So long, folks. But once when at a prayer meeting, and sometimes when I'd call a special prayer meeting, it'd just be me and him, and that was all right. He prayed some prayers that scared me, you know. He said, Lord, if I'm going to hurt one of your precious children in any way, please kill me now. I wasn't ready to pray that prayer. I didn't want lightning or anything to reach out my way. But one story he told me, he said, Brother Irwin, I used to preach that if you drank coffee, you were going to hell. And then one day I had a vision of one night, I dreamed I'd gone to heaven. Oh, it was beautiful. I can't describe it. And there were angels everywhere. And every one of them had a cup of coffee in their hand. Oh, my. So, I threw that in. I don't know why. Things, you know, thoughts come to me, and I think, I can't pass this up. But we're still in Philippians chapter 2. It says, he was obedient even unto death. And then it says, therefore. Therefore. Therefore, God has raised him up and given him the name that is above every name, at whose name every knee shall bow in heaven and earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now, when you look at this list, from a human standpoint, it's not all that exciting, you know. It violates our manhood, you know what I mean? You want me to be a sissy? No, it takes a real man to do this. Jesus says, blessed are the meek. By the way, that word blessed, it was a coin toss whether they would say happy or blessed. Same word. When I hear people say, God does not guarantee us happiness. Yes, He did. Right there. So you can reword that if you like. Happy are the meek. The meek. The problem here is it rhymes with weak. But I remember my granddad had captured 2 or 3 wild horses, man, and they were wild. Big things, man, strong, and they'd about tear up the corral right after he had captured them. You'd hear it all captured. You'd hear it all night long. Whack, blam, blam, whackity whack, blam, blam, you know. And then he, as we put it, broke them. We can also call it tamed them. And after that, they were still as strong as they had been before, but now they could work and be productive. So meekness is when we go from destructive to productive. When our great strength comes under complete control and we're still strong, we're still men, but we're productive. God surrounded me when I was in college, and God was dealing with me about preaching rather than being a doctor, you know, a brain surgeon. So be thankful. And He surrounded me with a bunch of over-the-road tough truck drivers, man. And they prayed with me and cried with me, and I learned their histories, and before they got saved, they had reputations up and down the road, let me tell you. But after they got saved, they had reputations. There was a whole bunch of Christians all the way up and down those over-the-road places where they were. And that's meekness, you see. They were just as tough as they'd ever been, just as strong, just as male. But now, their great power was under complete control. And it was aimed in a way that was totally productive. And that's what happens with meekness. And that's what's happened when we are following Him. Therefore God has raised Him up and given Him the name that is above every name, at whose name every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now, this may not be exciting to you to look at in the natural, but let me tell you, we have a secret, and it's therefore God. You can go another route and in this world become famous, but I think Andy Warhol was right. Everyone has 15 minutes of fame. And it's amazing to me how many people I know who were famous, their 15 minutes is up. You never hear their name anymore. Oh, but folks, when God raises you up, there's coming a point where He's going to present us to the Father. Each of us, every one of us, He's going to present to the Father. Here, Father, here's this person, and here, Father, is this person, with exceeding joy. Now, what are you suppose that look like? He says, okay, Father, here's Dean. Would you let it be recorded that I'm presenting him with exceeding joy? Now, my middle name is Dean, so I'm going to use Dean again. And here's the other Dean. His first name is Gail, but I didn't mean to tell you that. That's kind of... And Father, I did the best I could. I'm sorry. That's the best I got. Here he is, though. No. Really, when it talks about exceeding joy in the Bible, it's kind of got a jump down, turn around, touch the ground. You know, it's cartwheels and woo! And you find that those wise men who were coming for Jesus, and they found out that Bethlehem was just a few miles down the road, they were filled with really exceeding joy. Let the record read it. We had exceeding joy. I think they were off those camels, man, and jumping up and down and shouting and yelling, doing cartwheels, everything they could to lose their dignity. And I think Jesus is going to be so tickled to present us to the Father. And He's going to do us one by one. Your name is going to be heard by the whole of creation. And people are going to see Jesus. What is He doing? Guys, forgive me. Last night, I got a vision of that. When all of those insects came out. Everybody. Oh, I wish you could see things through my eyes. Thank you for this time. I've enjoyed you. I hope this has been enlightening in some ways and reaffirming for you, probably more of that than anything else for you guys, because I know what goes on around here, and these are things that you hear. I just present them more wildly. But I sure enjoy my times with you. You've always been very, very kind to me, very receptive, and I enjoy the fellowship with you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We'll continue talking about Jesus, so it's the only thing I know. I've had people say, look, we'd like to have you come back for us, but do you have anything new? I say, no, I don't even understand the old yet. And I've decided to write down a little bit of a story about what I share with you. And I'll just tell you this, and it's a long story why I'm doing this, because I'd always said I wasn't going to write a biography, because I've found that biographies are much too self-centered, I think. You know. And I read this thing, and I'm embarrassed writing it, I'll tell you. But I had been involved with some college ministries in the Midwestern part of the central southern part of the United States. And God had let me lead them into very great success in their ministries because I understood the kingdom. And then we decided to have, they did, a retreat with me, sort of a celebration one before the leadership was graduated from university. And so they booked a place. It was a Baptist, rather primitive Baptist campground that sat on the border of Oklahoma and Arkansas, just out of Fort Smith. And the place was jammed with collegians. And I had to use a chalkboard. Anybody remember chalkboards? That was the up thing then. And I was speaking on a Saturday afternoon, quite like this. And I gave people permission. I hadn't given you permission to interrupt me, but I gave them permission to, because if we'd had another hour, I'd have given you permission to interrupt me, because if you ask me a question, it takes me an hour to answer it. Those of you who've been with me in this know that I'm that way. But a girl interrupted me as I was teaching. She said, I keep hearing you talk about Christian leadership, and I don't understand how that differs from any other kind of leadership. Nobody's ever explained that to me. And I said, well, if we're going to call it Christian, we have to get it from Jesus. So I started putting some things up on the chalkboard, and someone, and I don't know who it was, from the crowd, my back was turned, said, maybe his greatest in the kingdom teachings would help us. So I erased what I had put up there, and we built that Saturday afternoon in about 1972 the nature of Jesus on that chalkboard. And it was a spiritual, emotional, any kind of experience you want to describe it as with me. I felt like heaven was playing my strings. And I looked at that, And I thought, there is the rest of my life. I will never plumb the depths of what I'm looking at. And that's the way it has been. And my excitement level, I may be an old man, but I plan to go out burning. You know? I'm not going to be just, oh, that smoke stinks, you know. God has blessed me with health and strength and desire, and as long as He has, I plan to use it for Him. Because I haven't found anything this fun. I have some doctor friends, old high school buddies of mine, and I look at them, you know, and I think, oh, thank you, God, but for your grace, there goes me. I mean, on one of them, I'm the only friend he has now. Another one committed suicide. Capable guys, you know. And they don't understand what's wrong with me. Except one of my doctor friends I led to the Lord. It was a wonderful thing that happened long after high school, when I finally had a computer and I could get the national phone directory. I looked him up first, you know, and called, and a female voice answered. I said, is this where so-and-so lived? No, this is his beach house in Pensacola. Oh. Well, and I said, I'd like to talk to him. Well, who are you? I said, well, he was left guard, I was right guard on the football team. We're old buddies, and I just want to get back. Okay. She gave me his unlisted number. And I called him, and then we began to converse, and I sent him some of my materials, rather well-oriented ones. And he accepted the Lord off. He wrote me the most beautiful letter, which I have kept. I keep all of those letters. If you're mad at me, I keep that letter. I need to read that every once in a while. And if you're telling me what God has done in your life because they heard about Jesus, I keep that letter too. And so, like my money, my automobiles, you know, they're not going to heaven with me, and those letters aren't, but I still appreciate them anyway. God bless you guys. Pastor, what do you got to tell them? Do they know how to leave? Here, you can. Yeah, I'll do that.
Anybody have any questions? Is there a Starbucks in hell? Since people are going to no, just kidding.
I have a daughter, by the way, who is so crazy about grits. When she was about 5 years old, she asked her mama, will there be grits in heaven? We assured her there would be grits in heaven. What? No coffee? No cockroaches.
We don't have any here in Hawaii.
Oh, well, they'll be edible in heaven. Tasty.
Gail's going to be on Maui on Wednesday, and my pastor friend that he's going to go and share at their fellowship, he told me, I'm looking forward to not just the time of Gail sharing, but he said, Ben, every time I see him at the conferences, he said, I've always wanted to talk to him, but he said, there's so many people around him, I can't get close to him. So I'm just really blessed and privileged to have him here. That's why I asked Gail if I want to take a few questions. And if you guys have a question, anybody?
I shouldn't have told him it takes me an hour to answer a question.
Anybody?
I know I create questions in people's minds. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Well, I keyed off of, if you want to find your life, Jesus said this, lose it. And the whole process of therapy is helping people find their lives. And so what I built was this, really, with those guys. I said, to find your life, because everybody wants to have a better life. Everybody wants to be healed. Everybody wants more out of life and so forth. And the one who created life says the way you really find all that you can be, here's your secret. And you got to lose it. And that's what this means, is giving it away. You're blessing others. And I said, when you have developed an others-centered activity in people's lives, they'll be well. And they agreed with me. By the way, I did 3 months in a mental institution. You may not be aware of that. I was an intern studying. And I discovered that they had accidentally almost developed some things from the Scripture. They didn't know that was where it was from. And it was an unusually successful hospital because they would help people really get out of themselves and into others and into productive things in a way. It was very awesome.
What was it from Scripture that actually used?
I don't really know the answer to that. I don't, but I can tell you one experience I had there. This was in, the hospital was in Pineville. They had about 3,000 patients at that, a big one. I lived across the river in Alexandria, and back in the beginnings of the Assemblies of God, they started in 1914. In 1916, they had a big split, and that was the oneness, the United Pentecostal, Jesus-only people went off. Now, they happen to believe that unless you speak in tongues and are baptized in Jesus' name only, you're not saved. Well, they happen to have oh, by the way, they took every church at that time out of Louisiana. It all became one. And they're still the big ones in that state. But they have this huge campground that will handle 5,000 people out on the edge of town. And every year when they have it, all the politicians come, because they want to be seen in a spiritual setting. Just want you to know, I believe in the big man upstairs. And on a Friday afternoon, I had finished counseling with someone in one of the more open wards. And I noticed that they were putting up beds, bunk beds, double-decker bunk beds in the hallway. And there was a psychiatrist there whom I happened to appreciate very much. He had a great spirit. And I said, "Oh, are you redecorating and bringing the beds out from the rooms? You going to be painting?" He said, No, we're going to have people come in by the truckload tonight." I said, "What? What is it, the moon or something?" He said, "No, there's a Holy Roller campground on the edge of town. And this is their last night. And they bring people in by the truckloads." And I instantly knew what was going on. These were poor, believing people who loved God. But after a week of praying intensely down at the front, they had not spoken in tongues. And so they couldn't handle it. There was nothing else to do. God must hate me. And they would crack and bring them to that hospital. I thought, God, I never want to have a theology that does that to people. Because I believe, I'm learning more and more about what I call the heart of God. I believe that there is a love for people in you that would never do that to people. A gentleness in you. Does that answer your question? I wandered away. Because they were secular. They didn't even know how to witness to people. They knew there had to be a spiritual something that would change them, but they didn't know how to produce it. So we can't do it. Yes, I saw a hand out here. Somewhere. Yes, ma'am. Let me get over here where I can hear you.
Being in human health was being other-centered. So, in other words, the servanthood was your cure for good health kind of thing.
I really believe it is. But I was talking about if each part of your body was a servant, as it's built up to be, then you'd be totally healthy. Can you be too other-centered? You can't really, but what we have to do, and I didn't explain this whole thing about servanthood is not servitude. There's a difference between servitude and servanthood. Servanthood is by choice, servitude is by force. That is very unfulfilling. You ever heard of burnout? It's burnout guaranteed if you are forced into it. I have learned well, I told you, crow does not taste, no, I told the guys that last night. Crow does not taste good. I've eaten a lot of crow where I had to admit I wasn't supposed to do this, and I was forced into it, and that's how come I'm so unhappy then, you know. But when you choose to serve, Paul talks about things, man. I have been beaten half to death. I have been in shipwrecks. I've been starving at times. It doesn't move me. Why? Because he chose to do that, you know. He was glad to do that. He was having more fun than anybody up until me. So yeah, this is servanthood by choice, and only by choice, really. I hope that clarifies some things. See, I was supposed to tell you that already, but see, it took the question and answer session. Any other? Does that meet your questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
So, how about like when you're behaving as a servant? I mean, there's a lot of people out there.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes their needs clash, and you get caught in the middle of that. Is there any advice on how to deal with that situation?
No.
That's kind of what I was figuring, but I thought I'd ask you anyway.
Yeah, it's to me kind of like, you know, on Southwest Airlines, they'll do this, you know. Some of these folks think they're comedians, and they do pretty good. They must have writers. And they talk about if we have sudden loss of pressure or something, there'll be these masks that come down with oxygen. And if you have put yours on first. And if you have 2 children, decide which one you love the most. Sometimes you have to recognize that if we have not really discerned what is right and best for some people, our helping can hurt them. Often I know we from America go into foreign countries with the answer, and we damage people. And we really haven't served them. You know, I can give you a lot of examples of that in Africa. Just heartbreaking when I hear about it. And the people who did it would tell you, well, we're just serving. Well, they thought they were. So you have to do what is right and best for people. And sometimes you need to live with them a while before you know. And you really have to discern manipulators, because they will eat up your time if you don't have the discernment to know that they're manipulators. I have a book called Handbook for Servants where I give a whole chapter on dealing with manipulators. You bought it. Good for you. Yes, ma'am. That's all they've learned. Yeah, that's true. That's true. We are taught manipulation at home as we're growing up. And I just use an example. I said it could be that when you left home, your mother said, "You're leaving me now. I've waited. I need you so bad, and now you're leaving me." And a guy just turned white as a sheet. He said, "Those were the exact words my mother used." Yeah. And it's a hard thing to break away, but we've been taught that, and so it's a hard thing for us not to do. But this is the only way it happens, where we begin instead. Because see, those words said, "You see, you're leaving me." That's a key. Yeah. Rather than, "Boy, I'm so glad that you're going to make it on your own. It'd be nice to hear from you from time to time, you know." I've made it a point to call my parents about once every 6 months. It's a guy thing. I don't know what to say. But my mom had 3 boys, man. And when we finally had a girl, they just were beside themselves. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
And then also when you added, like when you go to another country and you want to fix things, because you're saying that you're serving, would it be like more selfish, this pride, like puffiness, like I know what I'm doing, and not humble and like kind of issue? It's more of an internal issue with a person.
I would need more understanding to answer that, but let me just give you a little clue. When I first went to Africa, 1978, it wasn't my first time to Africa, but my first time to what was in Rhodesia, to speak at this conference that was mixed race, first conference of that type of mixed race. And I did several things there because God had already dealt with me a lot about my life. And so I knew that the whites had everything and the blacks had virtually nothing, but I spent my time with them, and I got to know them. I would eat with them. I would learn their names, and some of them were so great. I thought, man, we ought to start naming people this way. I know what my name would be. It was one of those African guys whose name talks a lot. And another one named Lovemore, and I loved this one. This was like, I'm going to conquer the world with a name. She named her son Doctor. And he's doing great in the kingdom now. I first personally wondered whether he'd ever make it, but God honored that. But I walked with them, I ate with them, and then on Thursday of that week, 2 phenomenal things happened to me that have shaped my life ever since. One guy, nice guy, I think he was a pastor. I thought he was. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I don't know. But he came up to me and he said, I'm going to tell you something that is, I can be fired for this. But he says, I'm with the Secret Service, and I was appointed to watch you. And he said, if we had treated the blacks like you have treated them this week, we would not be in a civil war right now. And I thought, if only you could go back and do this. But then on lunch of that Thursday, they asked each of us speakers to take a luncheon meeting and just sort of explain how I got this way. And since I'm an old Mississippi boy, I had some things to say about how God had dealt with me. And so I told my story. And I noticed a black couple getting very excited about what I was saying. And afterward, he said to me, would you come with me to see my office? Now, I've seen offices, And I was about to say, if it's okay with you, I'd rather not. But it's like, when God gets hold of you and He says, if you don't go with Him, I'll have to kill you. So I said, yes, I'd like to see your office. And so we only walked 2 or 3 blocks away, and here in this high rise, he had the whole second floor. See, the whites had no clue what God was doing among the blacks. And as we walked into that building, and every eye in there turned and looked at me. I did not know until later that I was the first white man ever to come in that office. And he did something that I will never forget as long as I live. He said, where everyone could hear him, I'm going to kneel down here and I want you to lay hands on me and bless me. Now I was about to do it, but once again I heard God say, if you do this, I'm going to have to kill you. So I grabbed him by the shoulders and lifted him up, and I said, no, you are a much greater man than I am. I'm going to kneel down. I want you to lay hands on me and bless me. From that moment on, I was black. I just had a horrible skin disease, that's all. And he and I became super friends. His wife even said to me, you are his friend, you are his only friend. She said, we do not use the word friend like you Americans do. That means that you're closer than any of his relatives. I wrote his biography for him, and when I was over there, it's still in print, they would introduce me by holding up the book and said, our speaker today is the author of this book. And suddenly I'm a rock star, girls screaming. No. No, not at all. And with him, I sat down and helped him write his theology for his church. I would go every year to preach at their 2-week-long pastors' conference. They couldn't handle a 1 week, man. We walked too far, and you're not going to just get by. And they'd be a little upset with me if I quit after an hour. I just wanted you to know that. But I still love you, don't worry. And he would come to our house in California when we lived in West Covina every year and spend a month to 6 weeks with us just resting. Because he couldn't rest in Zimbabwe. He'd try to hide. They'd find him. There'd be a block-long line every morning for him to pray for him because he had a powerful healing ministry and so forth. And I realized after a while that God had given me an intro to that country and those people that I cherish even now. And when I started going, I took about a 26-year pause out of that, and then 3 years ago started going back. And I couldn't believe how big it had become. I mean, it's the biggest thing in Zimbabwe for sure, probably the biggest thing in Africa. They asked me to do a conference in April 3 years ago, and they said, we have 2 conferences, pick the one you want. I said, can I do both? Will you? Yeah. So I thought I was going over for a pastor's conference. They have the biggest auditorium in Zimbabwe to 5,000 people on their Bible school grounds. And I said, is this a pastor's conference? Oh, no. This first one is just for elders from the Harare capital area. 5,000 elders? Well, actually more like 8,000 because we have to use another auditorium in a church we have just a few miles away. Oh. Well, what about the second one? Oh, that's all deacons from the capital area. And I realized this thing is out of control. This is incredible. And when I went over, you learn a lot of things. You hope you do. And one thing I learned is you don't violate protocol. It's easy for we Americans to do it because we're so aggressive and we think we got all the answers and so forth. But I knew that the front row, and it wasn't very big, maybe 15 chairs long. Where you sat on that was an indication of how important they thought you were. And I figured I'd be in the balcony because it had been so long since I'd been there. And I approached Guti, the director, the guy that founded it all. I said, Guti, I don't know where I'm supposed to sit. Don't worry, they'll show you. Oh, okay. So when they started making their entrance, Guti went left first, and I'm waiting. And my guy who's carrying my Bible and was there to serve me said, well, are you coming now? Yeah. Okay. And I walk out, and he seats me right next to Guti. And here's a white man in front of this 5,000 people sitting in the number 2 spot, And I didn't ask for that, didn't expect it, would not have been in the least bit disappointed had I been seated several rows back. I'm just glad to be there. But every night, that's where I sat. And then about a year and a half ago, and I'll shorten this story to say, I took 46 wedding dresses over to Zimbabwe. You see, they still have a few poor churches left where the people can't afford them, and so they try to have one for each church, and those ladies are the world's best seamstresses, and they will adjust it to whatever size the bride is. And he said, yeah, we can still use some. And so I just started a little campaign, and soon I had 48. Actually, he asked us to send 2 to Belize, and my wife kept asking me, how are you going to get them there? And I said, I don't know. But I will. And so I approached DSL. They were the best for Africa. And they said, yeah, we can ship them over. It'll be about $1,500 per box. And I'm thinking, I can fly over cheaper than that. And they said, well, what's in it? I said, used wedding dresses. Well, we can't do that. The rules will not let us take any used clothing in by common carrier. I said, what am I going to do? He said, you'll have to fly it over as luggage. Well, I can do that. But I mentioned on Facebook that my wife kept asking me, how are you going to get them there? And I'd say, I don't know, but I will. And a guy who was of some means wrote me and said, don't worry about getting them there. And so he bought me a first-class ticket. And people want to know, how many wives did you have? Because the concept of gathering them from people, you know, you ladies, you buy a wedding dress, you keep it because you think your daughter's going to want it. She doesn't want yours. It just sits there. And I had ladies write me and say, oh, this is so much of God. I've had this thing for so many years, and I wonder what in the world am I going to do with this? And then I heard from you. Oh, you'd be so happy. But anyway, I happened when I delivered those things to arrive on the weekend. They were having, on a Sunday afternoon, the celebration of the leader's 90th birthday. He's 92 now. And so okay, and they drove me down to a big hotel, fancy hotel downtown. I said, oh, it's here, huh? Oh, no, really? No, we're just picking up more people here to follow us. And we went right straight to a huge grounds, kind of an amphitheater sort of thing, but much bigger. And it was so packed. I thought, I'm going to superimpose this on the Rose Bowl. And I came to the conclusion there had to be 100,000 people out there in the Capitol. This was just for the Capitol, Harare. But when we got there, I mean, it was set up. They had a stage for all the musicians and dancers, and then a big stage for, important people, and then bleachers behind that. It was all rock kind of stuff, I said, oh man, where am I going to sit? They took me right to Goody's side. And I thought, here are 100,000 people wondering, who in the world is that white guy? Why is he there? Should we shoot him? But at the end of it, this 90-year-old man preached about an hour-long, powerful message, man. I was in awe. I'm thinking, when I reach 90, I hope I can do that good. And 2,000 people got saved that afternoon on his 90th birthday. Then he said, we're going to have a healing service. Now, I only want serious conditions down here. If you've got a headache, we don't want to pray for you. And a guy started running, man, real fast. He said, stop. If you can run, this is not your service. Oh, this is unique. I need a video of this, But my relationship with Him, God, I still don't understand it all, but God has put it together. And I guess I was really working up to saying that I learned, and when I first went there, I didn't make proclamations out of my racism. I just listened. I wanted to learn. I wanted to, when you're listening somewhere, let me tell you this. This is a little secret if you don't know this. Let's say he's observing me and you talking, and if we're really listening to each other, they cannot tell the difference between that and being in love. Isn't that interesting? So test this with the guys, lady. You're not listening? Yes, I am. What did you say? When we're really listening to each other intensely, and I've learned to give my eyes to people. That's a very important thing. It's when you give your eyes and you listen and you're able to feed back some of the things they said that would be pretty intense, like, if you just go right over the fact, and then my mother died. I said, oh, your mother died. Well, how did that, affect? And that lets them know you're really listening. And you're listening to their heart also in that. And I just had to learn things like that. And I did that with the blacks. And Goody asked me once, he said, why do you love us? I said, it's because of Jesus. He said, no. Other people come to this country because of Jesus, and they love us for 3 months. Then they don't love us anymore. Why do you love us? I said, please, Goody, go back to what I teach. I can't teach this without loving you. And he understood then. I said, those other guys who come over may love you, but I bet you they don't teach this. Because if they do, they have to love you. And the way it worked out. He's quite a guy. Any other questions? One more at the most. I think I've already told you everything, more than I know. Is that it? All right. Have a good day.